Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome to another episode of Elaborate Topics. We are your hosts, Tywauna Wilson, Lona Small, and Stephanie Whitehead. Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast that gives you practical tips that you can use inside and outside of the laboratory. So we want to make sure that you have those practical technical tips, leadership tips, and career and growth tips as well. And so each week we bring you new topics, we bring you new guests. We are in season 2. So if you missed season 1, you have missed a ton of episodes. So make sure you go back and listen to some of our previous episodes. I'm sure you will find a lot of value. And when you do, make sure you give us a review because we would love to feature you on our social media channels. So you can give a review. It'll be very quick. You can do it from your phone, and we will highlight you as a medical laboratory professional who is an Elaborate supporter. So today we have another episode for you that's an interesting episode. We want to talk about women of medical laboratory science, so women in the field. And for those of you who could be friends of the laboratory, who's maybe tuning in for the first time, you've come across the podcast on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube or even social media, and you're like, what are they talking about? And what is this whole lab deal? What exactly is it? Sounds interesting, but I'm really not sure what it is. So just want to give you a little bit an overview of the lab. This is not all inclusive because what we do is complicated, but I'm going to try to make it simplified in case if you are thinking you might too want to be a woman of medical laboratory science. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you enjoy solving puzzles and problems? Like, does that make you get excited? Do you enjoy hands-on work? If you do, medical laboratory science could be the profession for you. The profession is appropriate for anyone with a strong interest in science who enjoys working independently and wants a health career, but maybe you don't necessarily want to work directly with patients. Medical lab professionals work in hospitals, academia, government, research, in a variety of settings, collecting and performing lab testing on clinical specimens to obtain information about the health of a patient to aid in diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease. The scope of the medical laboratory vary in size and complexity and offers a variety of testing services, different disciplines. So you got your blood banking, chemistry, hematology, infectious disease, and so forth. And if you didn't know, 70% of all clinical decisions are based on laboratory testing. So you're probably thinking, okay, so it sounds cool so far, but what are some of the roles that they do? So medical laboratory professionals serve as medical laboratory scientists and technicians, phlebotomists, pathologists, administrators, lab assistants, processors. Depending on your employer, you may have couriers, transcriptionists. Like, we have something for everybody. And so those are just a few things about the medical laboratory. So as I was getting ready for today's show, I thought, let me see how many women are actually in our profession, right? Like, we're all women here. And how many women are in the profession? So, an interesting stat said that there are about 65% of all medical technologists or medical laboratory scientists or technicians are women. So, if you are a woman, this is a field driven by women, at least for the medical laboratory scientists and technicians. Not to say that we don't want men, yeah, we do, but currently it's mostly women in our industry. And the average age, which was interesting to me, that are employed in medical laboratories is like 43 years old. So here's the thing. If you are an emerging lab professional, this is a great time to get in because some of us could be closer to the retirement side, which means it opens up opportunities for you. And so I thought, well, let me dig a little bit deeper. Is this true on the pathologist side as well? And I know there was a group that recently presented at the ASCP annual meeting. And pathology, they actually have more women now as well. It's about 49% women pathologists serving in the medical laboratory community, which is again interesting. And so I said, well, how many people are out there that look like me in this industry? And that's where the numbers start to differ. So I didn't find a breakout of uh, African American women versus men, but there's only about 12% African Americans in the laboratory currently. And so when I look around the lab and I think about it, I mean, that probably is accurate. I recently had a gentleman, a medical laboratory scientist, and he reached out and have you ever worked with an African American male in leadership in the lab? And I said, yeah, because I have. I've worked with managers and directors, very few of my nearly 20 years of being in the industry, but I had. And for him, he hadn't. And when I look at the statistics that there's only 12% African Americans in the laboratory, then that's not a shock. That makes sense that he's seeing even less. And we already said that the industry is mostly driven by women. So I thought it was interesting. I think that's why this particular podcast, even though we're focused on women today, is important just to get out what we do to let people know that this is a viable career and to bring exposure to it. And that's our whole premise of this platform, is to be able to bring exposure, be able to give tips to those that are in the field and in the industry, and to be able to continue to connect lab professionals around the globe. Ladies, what do you think about that? What do you think when you think about like women in the industry? Is that representative of your lab when you think the majority of our professionals are women? What do
Well,
you think, Lona?
that's my experience. Especially now, I'm seeing more men entering the field, and I've been in the field for many, many years. And so before, it was really a profession of women. And I usually pride myself in saying that we it's a women leading profession, because a lot of people are struggling in other areas, where for me that's not a challenge, and so I'm very proud of that. Now we're having more men entering the field. That question that you asked about a um, male in leadership, African American male in leadership, never thought of that. And I've been in the field for so long. And since I've been in the States, I've worked in Jamaica for 8 years, 8 to 9 years. And I've been in the States for many, many years. And I can't remember having a male leader or seen a African American male leader. So another good thing about the institution that I work, it's so diverse, and I'm very proud about that. Diversity, not only when it comes to race, but when it comes to nationality. There are people from all over the world, so it's a great melting pot, and so I'm very proud of that. So I suppose depending on where you are, you'll see different, you'll have different experiences.
Mhm. I actually agree. I think I can recall two African American lab managers that I've either worked with or worked for in my career. So that's just a very interesting stat, that, to be behind the scenes and to have all of the skills that we have as medical laboratory professionals, that there's still a lot of awareness and advocacy to be done to make sure that we're truly diverse in terms of nationalities and race. And I would actually refer our listeners back to one of the episodes we've done in season one, where we talked about diversity and inclusion in the laboratory and why it is so important to have a both diverse in terms of years of experience, race, gender, identification, identities, and all of those things, but also inclusive environment in your laboratory where you may have a diverse area, but you're only listening to the more tenured techs. You may have a diverse laboratory, but only a specific voice. Only the technologist's voice matter. The phlebotomist voices don't matter. So we want to make sure that you guys understand the importance of having a both diverse and inclusive environment and how that will ultimately help, especially in today's climate, your laboratory go a lot further. But I think what's also really pivotal is because there are mainly women in our field, it pushes us as women to take on roles of leadership. If you look about around your laboratory, many of the leads, supervisor, technical supervisors, managers, directors, they're women. And so already having to balance many of the, just cultural roles that you have as a woman, but also having to step into leadership roles and how that impacts you and all of those things you have to build to gain strength as a leader. And so as all mothers, Lona's grandmother, all leaders in the field, how has your background and some of your experiences helped you become better leaders in this laboratory medicine space?
That's a great question. I'll let Lona kick that off since she has the most experience of us all.
I suppose our journey for me at 18, I was touring a lab, and that was the first time I've ever been in a lab. I didn't even know what medical lab profession
Mhm.
was, but I found myself touring this lab,
Mhm.
and it wasn't even a planned tour. I went to get my blood drawn just to get to do my medical, because I was trying to apply for a job. I just finished high school and I didn't get the grades that I needed to go into medical school. And so for me, I was like, I was kind of lost because they groomed me to go to medical school.
Yeah.
And so I got my blood drawn and I saw these people. I'm like, wow, it's interesting. This is a hospital. These people in lab coats drawing my blood. I'm like, what do you do? And
Mhm.
at first I was going to hear about medical lab scientists. They said we're medical technologists at the time.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you know, this guy volunteered to tour the lab and told me enough about it that made me make a decision that day. And I made a decision, and he told me how to apply because I was kind of lost, just got out of high school, didn't get the grades. You had to get straight A's to go to med school. And so I applied, and that part of it was history. But with time, I was in the lab, and after a while, I felt as if I wanted to make more impact. I wanted my job to make more kind of a difference. I've done like everything. I've gone into different leadership roles. I worked in as a generalist. I've worked as specialist. I've worked in academic institutions, small community hospitals, and I was like, I wanted to do something else. And with long story, I ended up applying for a healthcare MBA, and that kind of exposed me to a lot of opportunities that medical lab scientists or anybody in the medical lab profession can there are just so many options out there. And so that's kind of led me to moving into process improvement, quality management, patient safety, and all the other things that I'm doing today. So I'm glad for that journey. I'm happy for some of the failures and some of the confusion that I had along the way, but I learned a lot, and now I can package all the experience that I have in the lab, and I'm really happy where I am today. So what about you ladies? What was your journey into the medical lab field?
Stephanie, you want to go or you want me to take it?
Take it, because I love hearing that story about the test. That's my favorite testimony.
So for me, I actually thought I was going to dental school. That was my goal when I graduated from high school, because I went to a co-op or a professional high school. And so I was in dental assisting, went to the state of Ohio dental board, was certified, had my radiographer license. So when I went to college, I was on my way to dental school. And so I said, well, I want a degree, but not biology, because I'm like, okay, what happens if I don't make it to dental school? So I was thinking plan B. And so I found in the book, medical clinical laboratory science is how my school categorized the program. And so I said, okay, I think this is good. They talking about the chemistry, and they talking about genetics, and they talking about interesting stuff. So I went and talked to the dean, who happened to have been an African American male that was a medical laboratory sciences. So I was like, okay, I'm interested in this whole clinical lab. Should I do this? Is this a rewarding degree field? And he was like, yes. So I guess for me, that was my first exposure to an African American male in leadership in the laboratory. And so that's how I got into it. But a background story, which is interesting, is that I was very close to my grandmother when she was alive. And she would always go and she would get her blood drawn. My grandmother was O positive. And so she would go to the community blood center in Dayton, Ohio. And she was, listen, they would call her. I don't know how many thousands of gallons of blood that she donated over her life, but she every 8 weeks she was there. Like, listen, I gotta go get my blood drawn. I'm like, Granny, why you really own this? They ain't not paying you. Like, you are this blood thing. You like going way far. And I was young, and she was like, you don't understand. She said, the lab saved my life. She said, when I was pregnant, she said, I received a blood transfusion. And she said, after that instance in my life, she said, I knew that was something that I had to do. I had to continue to give blood because somebody that I don't even know gave blood for me. And so I thought about that too as I was thinking about my career, because my granny was such an active force in my life. And so I had that. And then I had, okay, here's the dean. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the path. And so I went through undergrad, and I never looked back. I never looked back at the dental school, because I got into the field. I did clinicals. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I could see what my grandmother meant. Interestingly enough, blood banking was my favorite area of the lab. But yeah, that was how my journey started. Now, I'm gonna tell you, it was a rough journey. So for those of you that have ever heard my story, you know it was a rough journey getting started, just by, as Lona talked about, failure and passing a test. So in our industry, you have to be certified, and in some states you have to be licensed. And when it came to passing the certification test, I just couldn't, for to save my life, I just could not do it. And so I was thinking, is this the field for me? Am I really supposed to be doing this? Like, is this a woman of medical laboratory science that the world will get to know and get to see? And it almost didn't happen. And so I'm glad it did, it's almost like the little engine it could keep trying and trying, and what's meant for you will be, and it will work out. So I passed my certification test. Fast forward, I've been in the industry for nearly 20 years. I've worked in a variety of labs, from adult hospital, pediatric, government, research, reference, you name it. I have worked in a variety of settings, even took a slight detour and got to start a mobile diagnostics program, which incorporated point of care lab with screening mammography. And so I think it's important for people to see women in this industry in front of the scenes. That's why I think this podcast is so important, and not just behind the scenes doing the work. But I have truly enjoyed my journey into this field. And I know for me, especially thinking back to those statistics of, African Americans in this industry, with it being, 12%, and then in leadership is even less, is even more important for me to be on the forefront, and really for us to be on the forefront of this profession. But I've enjoyed the journey, been in it nearly 20 years, and that's how I got to where I am today.
Well, for me, I'm just like many laboratory professionals and kind of just stumbled into the field. My brother, I have an older brother who is 4 years older than me, and him and I, although very close, he was always, since he's 4 years older than me, exiting a field of education while I was entering that field. And so when he was going into high school, I was going into middle school. And when he was going into college, I was going into high school. And we're very close siblings. And in his high school, I don't know if he was a junior or a senior, but he had to do a project on what he wanted to do when he grew up, and a career he wanted to be in. And he did his project on being a medical laboratory scientist. And I'm assuming that he had to, speak this speech in front of people because he was practicing on me. And as he was practicing on me, he was telling me all of the things that you do in a laboratory, and pretty much selling me this pitch on what he wanted to do as a clinical laboratory scientist. And so I'm sitting there as a middle schooler going, oh, that sounds like really interesting job to have. Well, he grew up to become, something very different in life. But when I went to college, that project, that talk that he practiced on me really just stuck and ingrained in my mind. And so when I went to college, I kept that as my undergrad. And I always knew that I was very interested in science. I was very interested in technology, but I was also very compassionate about people and wanted to help others and wanted to work in healthcare. But I didn't necessarily have the capacity to do what nurses and doctors do. I consider myself also a very empathetic person. And so some of the situations, especially now during the pandemic, God bless all of the nurses and doctors and people who are in direct patient care, because there are some very tough situations that only people with very specific skill sets and emotional intelligence can handle. And so I'm very proud of what they do, but I knew that was not me. And so I knew, with my love of technology and of my love of science, coupled with me wanting to help people in healthcare, but not necessarily be patient facing, that the laboratory was just a natural fit for me. And so I went through college, came out just like many people do, as a tech on the night shift. And, I let one of these laboratories sell me on working 12 hours on a night shift, and you're only going to have to work 2 weeks out of the month when you we work 7 days on, 7 days off. So that's really only 2 weeks out of the month. And me, being very young and naive, took that job and realized that my body was not a night shift body. I did not have a night shift body. And it was a great learning opportunity. And I will never trade it, but I definitely needed something more. And that was really the theme, or has been the theme, of my entire career. I like to take on challenges. And once I accomplished them, I never really like to feel like I've hit the ceiling. I always want a different challenge. I always want more. And so I would say, at the time I was working part time. And I had a supervisor and a director that I didn't like. And I felt like they were just the most incompetent people in the world. I mean, and so at home one night, and I'll never forget it, on a Friday night in my little apartment in Mississippi, I was sitting on the computer, and this is back when monster.com was, the way to find a job. Monster and Career Builder. And I said, look, if they can do it, I can do it. I'm as smart as them. And I'm in my early 20s, barely 2-3 years of technical experience out on the bench. And I'm thinking to myself, if they can do it, I can do it. Because in my mind, all they did was sit there and review paperwork and flip papers over and initial paper. They weren't doing nothing sitting in that office. So if they can do it, I can do it. So I applied for a job, got it, and got the rudest awakening. I mean, that was just the most humbling thing that I have ever been through in my life. Because the laboratory was not CAP accredited, but so inspected by CLIA. So, I had to drink from a water hose with that first inspection, understanding what standards were and competencies and Westgard rules and validation plans and standard operating procedures and all of these things that I would look at my, direct reports and think, oh, they're not doing anything. I learned very quickly they was doing a lot. And they was doing a lot with very little resources. And I think that's where I stumbled again into leadership, but I also grew a passion for leadership. And so, again, in my career, I never liked to feel like I hit the ceiling. And so once I felt like I had mastered that, and once I start getting it's a little intuition that I always feel like I'm on autopilot. I already know every day is Groundhog's Day. I start looking for something more. And so I moved to San Antonio shortly after Hurricane Katrina to open a laboratory. That was a fun, new, different challenge. I've always gone into a laboratory to work on, processes that were established and instrumentation that was already there. I've never built anything with the construction hat on, had to fit the construction hat over my braids. And so, that was different for me too. And I think all of these experiences really started to develop me not only as a laboratorian, but also as a leader. And I see myself now as equal parts, both laboratorian and very much a advocate and very much a clinical laboratory scientist, and proud of who that is and what that has afforded me in my career, but also a leader, both in the laboratory field and in other volunteer work that I've done. And to me, like I said, being a woman in this field and having to understand what that also means as you grow into leadership, one of the things that I'm most grateful for is getting into leadership at an early age really forced me to learn about self-awareness and how important and essential self-awareness is to being an effective leader. Really understanding yourself and what you bring to the table, and having a balanced view of what your strengths and weaknesses are. And we've talked about this on several podcasts. It's okay if you're not the smartest person in the room, but you have to understand where you are weak so you can either get help or lean on others where those weaknesses are. It doesn't help anybody to just pretend like you're strong all the time, especially when you're not. And so as a leader and getting into these roles, it's not easy as I initially thought. And I had to learn how to push through insecurities and fear and anxiety, especially when you're thrown into rooms where, like Tywauna said, not everybody in the room looks like you. People may be older than you. People may be a different race. You may be the only female in this room, but still having the confidence to exert, what you need to say and have that come across for your team and whoever you're leading. And then, as I continue to excel in my career, also balancing that with how I started to grow as a female, become married, have children, and then having that life balance of being a community leader, a mother, a wife, and then also a healthcare leader. And so that was my journey. Like the lady said, I wouldn't trade anything for it because I feel like I've learned so much. And right when I felt like I hit the peak again, A blessing in disguise has been the pandemic, because through the pandemic, I've been able to connect with my wonderful co-hosts, and start this podcast, which is, been another challenge and another platform to advocate and reach out and stretch yourself in a different way, and really connect with people who challenge you in different ways. And so, from your perspective, why has the podcast, been so important and purposeful in your lives and what you've been doing, or really just enhance what you were already doing?
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephanie. I think what the podcast has done is it brings us together. So, we as medical laboratory professionals tend to be behind the scenes, those unseen heroes that are making it happen. And I think this platform has allowed us to bring medical laboratory professionals around the globe together, near and far. I know for us and people who have watched us know that to date, we changing that in 2022, people, that we have never physically met before. And so, we all had a passion to serve, as women do, but we had a passion to serve, and we knew that collectively we could be better together than we could be individually. And so we've not physically met, but this platform has allowed us to be and get connected. And so I'm in Ohio and Stephanie's in Texas and Lona's in Maryland. And right there, that's just bringing, states together. But we've had so many guests around the globe to be on our platform that it's just been a great connector. And I think it's very important because people really didn't know about the lab. And while they still are learning, I think they know a little bit more today than they did yesterday. But I think this platform just gives that additional exposure to the industry, but it also gives support to the professionals that are out there. I know for me, I'm big on mentorship, and I feel I can say the same for you all as well. Are big on mentorship and the importance of that. And sometimes your first mentor is somebody that you don't know. It could be, a book, but in this case, it could be us on this podcast. Could be serving as mentors to people that we don't even know, that are struggling in their labs, want to figure out ways to grow in the industry, want to figure out how to be a better leader, how to be a better laboratorian, how to interview better, how to network better. And so I think this platform is just very impactful and purposeful on a multitude of ways for those that are in the laboratory and those that are friends of the laboratory. But it's also been rewarding and impactful for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same for me. And I think that it actually give us an opportunity to use the passion that we have to help other medical lab professionals. For me, after putting in many years in the field, you get to that point where you want to reach back and help others. And although I usually, most of the things that I do are usually collaborative. That's kind of one of my biggest strengths. I like to collaborate, bring people together, people that have different expertise. I do that in the workplace because if you're trying to improve anything, you're going to need different experts in the room. And that I recognize as a strength of mine, kind of bringing people together. And so we together as a team and having guests on the show can actually reach back to help others. Once I've put in all this work and I've learned so much, my goal is to help others to do the same. So especially medical lab professionals, there are a lot of times we hear a lot of complained about the job and a lot of dissatisfaction in terms of people not being able to work at their highest potential or make the impact that they want. So this is an opportunity to highlight either guests who are doing the work, who are doing there's a lot of different things that we can do in the profession. And we have guests that comes on that can be role models for others. And we as co-host can help with tools based on some of the mistakes that we have made, based on some of the successes that we have. We can use that as tools to help others. So I'm really happy that we have this platform, we have this opportunity to help others to use our zone of genius, because for all three of us, we have different zone of genius. Stephanie is a really great leader in terms of one of the traditional executive director for the lab. Tywauna had several hats where she worked as a director in the lab when it comes to the technical aspect, but she also does some mentorship and coaching and leadership on the side. I am full into process improvement, quality and patient safety, and culture, leadership culture, and coaching. So we bring this together to help others. So I'm really happy for this opportunity, and I'm so happy for Elaborate Topics podcast.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Stephanie talked about too is, what have you learned about being a leader in the lab? And one of the things that I have learned is that some of the opportunities I have had, I know that everybody doesn't have those. And what I have also learned is that some of the mentorship and support that I've had or been fortunate to have is not everybody's story. And so it's important as we are mentoring others and giving them the tools that they need to be successful, to understand that everybody's viewpoint or level of exposure is not the same. And so we get feedback about this show, and we'll get scientists that reach out to us, some of which are taking a leadership role for the very first time. And so they're like, this is new and I don't know what to do. And then we also have people too that maybe hadn't had a positive experience in the lab. And they're like, I think that I'm ready to change careers. I think that I'm ready to do something different. But because of your exposure and seeing you all, I think I might stick with this lab thing. This lab thing might just be it. And so I think that too is some of the things that I've learned as a leader in the lab, that, if you've worked at one place your entire career, your level of exposure is going to be very different than somebody that maybe have worked in a few different labs over their career. And it could be even different from somebody who has worked in a few different labs in a few different states, because every state is operates different, and because of their population, what's happening in their environment, working in a licensure state versus a non-licensure state, presents some different things. But one of the big things that I can say that I really learned as a leader, especially as I've led different teams at different facilities, is that your level of exposure, don't take it for granted that everybody has that same level of exposure. And then that, with the exposure being differently, the way that people make decisions are different, the way that people think is different. And that whole being self-aware, that is critical. Being self-aware of you and your strengths, and who on your team has the strengths in which you might be weak in, so that you're able to fully leverage their strengths. That way everybody wins. But I think it's important as leaders and being those in the lab, everybody can't be at the forefront. Everybody doesn't want to be at the forefront. But I think it's important to be able to understand the strengths and talents that you have on your team. And I think that's important from a leadership perspective. But for me, just really sitting down and understanding, as I talk to scientists all over, that their level of exposure is different. So the way that they make decisions is different. And it doesn't have anything to do with their level of education. Sometimes experience is the best teacher.
One thing that I've also learned is that, laboratory has kind of prided ourselves in being the hidden profession, and that's been the theme of so many lab weeks for, many, many years. But sometimes we are hidden even from each other, even from ourselves. And so that level of connection that other professions have, like nursing, like physicians, like pharmacy or radiology, where there are the professional organizations, have an abundance of membership, have an abundance of volunteers, and people are very active in those organizations, just sometimes isn't there for laboratory professionals. And so that's where you can start to feel as a laboratory professional. Once you've had a bad experience, you can start to feel very isolated, or you can start to feel like this is how it would be to work in all laboratories. This is how my career has to be for the rest of it because of, this one experience in this one laboratory. And I think the power of this podcast has been to have different guests on who have worked in different roles, who have had different levels of exposure, like Tywauna said, different years of experience, and bring different perspectives so that laboratory professionals can hear what the possibilities are. And once you hear those possibilities, if you still choose to leave the profession because that's what's best for you at this time in your career, that's fine. But then you can make a more educated decision and hopefully feel more settled in that decision once you decide to move on with your career from being in laboratory medicine. But I think in our profession, we've had so much of a connection through our professional organizations with how to be better technical scientists, how to be better in terms of how we do validation plans or write our SOPs, or identify cells or identify different illnesses, or elevate our laboratories in a technical aspect. But I think this podcast and others has been pivotal in helping elevate yourself personally, your personal brand, elevating where you want your career to go, taking control of the opportunities. So many times we've gotten feedback from people who say, well, the opportunities just aren't there. And, our response holistically has been every time you can create your own opportunities, you can create your own path, you can create your own journey. If the opportunity isn't there in the place where you work, you can move, you can leave, you can excel in so many different ways, or grow where you stand, taking different classes on speaking, virtual presentations, Excel classes, lean classes, and growing where you currently sit until that opportunity comes. And so just helping mentor people and how to be their best self, and where they are, I think just takes them a lot, like we say in the intro, helping you excel inside and outside the laboratory. Well, thank you for tuning in today and checking in on another episode with us. If you haven't caught up on all of the episodes of season 2, or you're missing some on season 1, definitely reach back and check us out. And like Tywauna said, in terms of exposure, share this episode. There are other women in the MLS field, or other men, or other scientists that want to hear these gems and these tidbits. And so definitely, share this episode, leave us a comment. We want to hear more from you on this topic. What are some of the things that you have learned, some of the invaluable lessons that you have gained from being in the laboratory medicine field? And what do you think that what are some of the things that being in the laboratory professional field has taught you about yourself as a professional, all of those things. If you like what you heard today, please make sure that you leave us a comment, share it, join us in some conversations on our Elaborate Topic LinkedIn group. Follow all of us on our social media, and we'd love to have you on our show. So fill out a guest interest form with us from directimpactbroadcasting.com, or reach out to one of us on our social medias. Tune in. We're here week to week giving you the same great information on this podcast. So tune in next week to hear another amazing episode of the Elaborate Topics podcast. And until then, have a fabulous day and stay safe.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.